I'd like to firstly thank Community Housing Cymru and the Welsh local government for the invitation to address you today. This is a crucial time for housing, and the challenges that we face today have never been greater. I'm delighted to be able to talk about the Essex report. It wasn't one of the One Wales pledges, but it was clear very early on that we needed a different approach to deliver our housing programme. And I'm going to talk about how we move its recommendations and key messages on in the short and the longer term, and in particular the priorities for the main stakeholders. So it's been about 2 months since the report was launched, and I want to say again what I said then, which is that this is a seminal report for housing in Wales. And the general consensus is that it captured very accurately the views and the concerns of stakeholders in Wales, and it can be of no surprise then that it's been warmly welcomed by them. I think it's indicative that so many organisations have expressed their enthusiasm for helping the Welsh Assembly Government deliver both the recommendations and the messages it contains, but equally we also know that the real challenge is just starting, because now we have to implement. Now, since the report was launched at the end of June, economic conditions have deteriorated further, and some are now speculating that this year will see the economy move into recession. Now, there are serious concerns about rising costs affecting food, fuel, and many other elements of people's daily lives, and it's already apparent that this is having a significant effect on people's ability to sustain mortgages and tenancies. The report makes clear that the housing market is always volatile and constantly shifting, and the role of government then is to intervene where there is market failure, ensuring that help is given to those who need it most. Now, it isn't always easy, but for all of us in this room, in one way or another, we're working very hard to help people in housing need. This is difficult in a buoyant market. In a failing one, the job gets even tougher. The report stresses that in meeting that need, we have to provide the right type of homes in the right places, of the right size, at the right time. And all this requires effective, targeted intervention. Essex is clear about what this means. Looking at the housing market in the round, and not just at affordable housing in isolation from everything else, having quality data that gives the bigger picture on need, supply and demand, ensuring that we use every opportunity open to us to increase supply, from purchasing existing properties, buying land, or bringing empty properties back into use. Being clear about our long-term direction, but being agile and sensitive to respond to short-term changes or pressures, and ensuring we have a flexible, coordinated approach where we share the responsibilities, the risks and the opportunities. I entirely agree with the report's findings that despite our best efforts to date, we need to find a different way of working to meet the challenges that face us. My intention is to put that right, and I know that others, including RSLs and local authorities, share that commitment. We all have a role to play, and working together to deliver the right outcomes following the Beeching model is the best way forward. This provides the context for my views on the key priorities for the major stakeholders. For RSLs, I think these are using your assets to increase the supply of housing. Now, we need to maximise all possible sources of money, and I think tapping into resources accrued in RSLs through investment of government seems entirely right. Maximising the activity you carry out in communities in your social enterprise role, working in partnership across and within consortia to drive standards up and costs down. This is particularly important in the development of sustainable homes in the light of rising fuel costs. Meeting quality thresholds with all its activities, and increasing skills and capability across the sector as a whole to enable them to rise to the challenge of greater responsibility and freedoms. For local authorities, I anticipate, and I would never say for sure what we're going to do, but I anticipate that they will focus on taking a more strategic approach to meet housing need, ensuring that we are building and sustaining communities and securing regeneration in their areas and beyond, ensuring that they're doing everything possible to deliver more housing, including affordable housing, and working together across boundaries and organisations, sharing intelligence, expertise, and if appropriate, staff and resources. Now, my priorities for the year ahead are to put in place the new regulatory regime described in the Essex report, to offer RSLs and local authorities stronger leadership combined with strategic direction and more enabling support. Changes within the structure of the housing division will help us to deliver our ambitions. I mentioned earlier that I'm very keen that RSLs should be able to do more in their communities, and this will involve giving them more freedoms to be responsive to need, and to introduce reforms to the way we use social housing grant, and to start to address the data gaps described in the report. Many of you here today will know that I have proposed a new approach to taking forward the recommendations in the report. Previously, ministers would have either made a direct response to it in the traditional style or consulted on it, but instead, stakeholders have agreed that we will work together in a true partnership to deliver a new cultural and operational direction across the sector that the report describes, and I know that Matthew Quinn will be describing in more detail later today how this will work. But the key point is that the programme we are putting in place will be jointly owned and implemented by the Assembly Government and stakeholders. This will all help us to establish a new way of working that will roll forward across all the joint activity. Now, the programme will consider the recommendations and also seek to deliver them. And I'm very keen that we make quick progress on the priorities I've just outlined. Of course, this is easy to say, but it's not so easy to achieve. And I suspect that the biggest challenge for us will be around changing working cultures and attitudes. And anyone who's been involved in significant change knows that patience and tenacity are crucial too. Even so, I do sense a real commitment from everybody to this new way of working, and change is already starting to happen, and we will need to look what we can do more and faster. So training, building the skills we need and the capacity to work together are essential to achieving our goals, and I think we need to look collectively how we do this. Now, the Assembly Government is committed to this. Over the summer, we've made significant steps forward on the interim recommendations made by the Essex Review team in advance of the final report. I have approved the building of 400 units in 22 existing schemes that support the new approaches by RSLs to reducing the cost of low-carbon homes to code level 4 and 5. And this will help us mainstream innovation. We will be managing these through the Social Housing Grant Programme. A revised RSL Circular 0206 on group structures will be issued on the 3rd of October. Nick, you can write that date down if you like. The 3rd of October. This will remove barriers for RSLs and enable them to contribute more widely to the regeneration of their communities. I have agreed that RSLs should be able to buy existing housing stock to respond to specific market circumstances. Now, RSLs may want to sell them again when the circumstances change. And there have been concerns of how WHQS and DQR relate to such properties, so I'd just like to clarify that development quality requirements will be relaxed in respect of new and partially, Alex writing that down, will be relaxed in respect of new and partially complete properties, subject to meeting acceptable criteria, so it needs to be there or thereabouts, Alex, just so that you don't get entirely the wrong impression. Any older existing properties purchased to address short-term pressures, which perhaps are going to be sold later on, will not need to meet Welsh Housing Quality Standard. Write that down as well, Alex. And if they are to remain in the social housing stock permanently, they will need to meet WHQS, but I'm very prepared to give a reasonable length of time for that to happen.